In a nation that has long been defined by battles of power and perception, few moments have carried the weight and intensity of the confrontation now unfolding between Susan Monarez and Donald Trump. At first glance, it might appear to be a dispute over a single leadership position, the role of the director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Yet beneath the surface, it is far more than that. It is a lightning bolt moment where politics, science, and the very fabric of public trust collide in spectacular fashion. A clash that has forced the highest court in the United States to step in, transforming what began as an internal administrative decision into a defining chapter of American history. Susan Monarez, a quiet yet steadfast figure, never planned to be at the eye of such a storm. Described by those who know her as disciplined, thoughtful, and deeply committed to public health, she was thrust into national prominence by circumstances beyond her control. For years she served diligently, often staying in the shadows while others took the spotlight. But when the call came for her removal, an abrupt move laced with political undertones, she did something few in Washington dared to do. She refused to step aside. In that act of defiance, she became more than an administrator. She became a symbol. Donald Trump, on the other hand, is no stranger to confrontation. His political identity thrives on conflict, on framing every issue as a battle of strength and dominance. Whenever challenged, he pushes back harder, transforming dissent into a spectacle, a public fight that rallies allies and deepens divides. To Trump, the head of the CDC is not just a person. It is a position of immense symbolic power, one that can validate or undermine his narrative on health policy, government control, and his continuing influence over the Republican movement. To give up this fight would be to admit vulnerability, a reality that his political persona simply cannot afford. And so, the nation watches as this dispute escalates beyond its expected boundaries. The issue is no longer confined to Washington office corridors or backroom negotiations. It has reached the marble steps and echoing chambers of the United States Supreme Court, a place revered for its solemnity and finality, now caught in a storm of cameras, microphones, and relentless speculation. Outside, crowds gather, divided sharply along the familiar lines of American politics. Some carry banners defending Susan Monarez as a courageous defender of science and integrity, others raising placards declaring Trump's right to command and restructure government at will. The air is heavy with chants, arguments, and an energy that feels equal parts protest, rally, and trial of the century. Inside, the stakes only grow more dramatic. Legal arguments swirl around constitutional authority, separation of powers, and the limits of executive reach. But beneath the formal language lies something rawer, more human, the question of whether truth and expertise can withstand the crushing force of political expediency. The tension inside the courtroom mirrors the tension outside on the streets, reflecting a nation fractured, uncertain of who to trust, uncertain of what kind of leadership the future will demand. For Susan Monarez, the decision to resist was not born from ambition. Colleagues close to her suggest it was made out of a deep loyalty to the institution she serves. To walk away quietly, she believed, would be to abandon the CDC at a moment when credibility matters most. For Trump, however, allowing her defiance to stand would be to admit a rare defeat, a concession that could ripple into every corner of his carefully cultivated influence. One woman holding her ground has become a challenge to the force of his persona, and that is something he cannot allow. What makes this moment so extraordinary is not only the law being tested, but the undercurrents of betrayal and loyalty swirling beneath it. Reports from behind closed doors speak of advisers warning Trump that the optics of the case could backfire. Some whisper of allies within his circle quietly supporting Monarez, believing that pushing her out would create more chaos than control. Others insist Trump has no choice but to push forward, no matter the cost, for to step back would be to erode his standing within the movement that sustains him. Meanwhile, Monarez too faces isolation. Her stance has won her admiration from scientists, medical workers, and a portion of the public. Yet inside government halls, she has been described as surrounded by shadows, abandoned by some colleagues who fear Trump's wrath, uncertain how long they can afford to stand beside her. Each day brings fresh leaks to the press, rumors of secret deals, and questions about whether her resistance can withstand the relentless machinery of political power. The confrontation has all the hallmarks of a political thriller: betrayal, suspense, quiet conversations turning into explosive headlines. But this is no fiction. Every decision, every maneuver, carries consequences for millions of Americans whose lives depend on the CDC's stability and direction. The courtroom becomes more than a legal arena. It transforms into a battleground for the soul of governance itself. And so the question lingers with haunting urgency. Is this struggle truly about the nation's future health policy, or is it something deeper, an existential fight for control, for authority, and for the survival of Trump's narrative of dominance? As the justices deliberate, as protests swell, and as whispers of backroom strategy shape the headlines, one truth becomes clear: the outcome of this clash will echo far beyond the walls of the Supreme Court. It will shape trust, leadership, and perhaps the very definition of power in America's future. In Washington, power is rarely exercised in the open. Behind every public statement and polished press release, there exists a hidden battlefield of whispers, backroom deals, and fragile alliances. The fight over Susan Monarez's refusal to step down from the CDC has ripped the curtain away from that private world, exposing a political theater where loyalty and betrayal are currency, and where even silence can be as loud as thunder. With Trump pushing relentlessly for her removal and the Supreme Court preparing to weigh in, the nation sees only part of the show. Cameras capture defiant speeches, crowds chanting in the streets, and pundits filling the airwaves with theories. But the true drama unfolds in dimly lit rooms, in hurried phone calls after midnight, in the nervous glances exchanged by those who claim allegiance yet secretly question whether the cost of standing with Trump has finally grown too high. Among his closest advisers, divisions crackle beneath the surface. Some argue that forcing Monarez out strengthens his grip, showing that no defiance can survive his will. Others warn in hushed tones that this public war risks casting Trump not as a leader in control but as a man consumed by vengeance, fighting not for principle but for ego. Still, Trump listens selectively. His instinct has never been to retreat from conflict but to intensify it, to make the fight itself a symbol of his power. At the same time, Susan Monarez finds herself both admired and isolated. She has become, almost unexpectedly, a figurehead of resistance. Scientists and health officials rally behind her, voicing concerns about politics interfering with public health. Yet inside government walls, many of her colleagues shrink away. To defend Monarez publicly risks being branded as disloyal to Trump, a label that can erase careers overnight. Emails go unanswered, phone calls brushed aside. For every ally willing to take a stand, two others quietly slip into the shadows, unwilling to risk the cost. And then there are the whispers, rumors of alliances forming in places few would expect. Certain Republican lawmakers, long loyal to Trump, are rumored to be uneasy with the optics of this war. They see Monarez as competent, quiet, nonpartisan in her approach. Forcing her out, they fear, could ignite a backlash powerful enough to fracture fragile coalitions within their own party. Yet few dare to say so out loud. Instead, they leak subtle signals to the press, quiet nudges that hint at dissent beneath the surface. Meanwhile, within the Democratic camp, strategists see an opportunity. They frame Monarez as the embodiment of integrity under fire, a woman standing against political bullying. Their narrative is clear. If Trump can remove a scientific leader for refusing to bend, then no safeguard remains against the erosion of truth itself. Every headline becomes ammunition, every delay in the case a chance to paint Trump as reckless. In private war rooms, they discuss strategy not only for the court of law but just as urgently for the court of public opinion. The pressure weighs heavily on Monarez herself. Friends describe late nights in her modest Washington apartment, papers scattered across her living room table, her phone buzzing endlessly with calls from lawyers, reporters, and former colleagues. They say she sleeps little, walking the streets quietly before dawn as if trying to breathe fresh air into lungs tightened by ceaseless tension. To some, she confides that standing her ground feels less like courage and more like necessity. If she yields, She believes science itself will take a step backward. On the other side, Trump treats the conflict almost like a campaign rally. In private dining rooms at Mar-a-Lago, he boasts that he has made the fight the center of every news cycle. He frames it as another battle against what he calls the deep state, a shadow government resisting his will. For his supporters, the image resonates. Their leader under siege, fighting once again against forces of control. For his critics, the spectacle is exhausting, a reminder of how easily institutions can become weapons in the pursuit of power. As the Supreme Court prepares to deliberate, the stage behind the curtain grows more chaotic. Black cars slip into underground garages, carrying senators, lawyers, political operatives who shuffle in and out of secret meetings. Their calculations are cold, their loyalties conditional. Some already prepare for the verdict to fall either way, drafting statements that praise Monarez if she wins or vilify her if she loses. To them, principle bends easily to survival. Yet beneath all of it, beneath the noise, the strategy, the theater, lingers a question that cannot be answered in any backroom. What happens when institutions meant to protect truth are forced to bend under the weight of unchecked power? The public may see only fragments, but those who inhabit the shadows know well, this isn't just about one woman and one president. It is about the soul of governance, about whether the machinery of a nation will be guided by reason or by force. And as the hours tick forward, the curtain may yet drop to reveal something darker than either side anticipates. Donald Trump thrives on conflict. It has always been his stage, his weapon, and his shield. Throughout his career, both as a businessman and as a politician, battles, whether televised, tweeted, or shouted from a rally podium, have defined his identity. For his supporters, this relentless combativeness is proof of his strength, his refusal to bow to convention or compromise. For his critics, it is evidence of chaos, a style of leadership that consumes rather than builds. The clash with Susan Monarez lays bare this contradiction more clearly than ever before. To Trump, her defiance is not simply an employment dispute. It is a personal challenge, a rejection of his authority. To yield would mean weakness, an intolerable blemish on a persona constructed around dominance. And so, he escalates. Instead of brushing her resistance aside quietly, Trump elevates her into a national figure, ensuring that her name, and his fight with her, plasters front pages and dominates airwaves. This move is both tactical and self-destructive. On one hand, it amplifies his ability to rally his base, portraying himself once again as the embattled leader under siege from unelected bureaucrats. On the other, it risks painting him as obsessed with control, unable to tolerate even the smallest act of dissent from someone outside his political orbit. The contradiction becomes inescapable. Trump thrives when challenged, but the very act of prolonging the fight magnifies the dissent he wishes to crush. Inside his inner circle, aides whisper conflicting advice. Some urge him to turn the page, to focus on broader policy victories, to let the issue fade quietly into irrelevance. But Trump cannot. His instincts do not allow retreat. He frames every narrative as victory or defeat. There is no middle ground. And the more Monarez resists, the more Trump insists on pressing forward, ensuring the conflict escalates to its most dramatic venue, the Supreme Court. At rallies, the contradiction intensifies. Trump speaks about Monarez not as a mere government official, but as a stand-in for the deep state, a faceless bureaucracy he claims is determined to undermine him. In this framing, her refusal is not about law, or science, or health policy. It is about power. He tells his followers that if someone like Monarez can refuse him, then none of them are truly safe from the reach of unaccountable authority. The crowd roars in approval, seeing in her defiance yet another symbol of the forces they believe conspire against their movement. Yet offstage, another story unfolds. In private conversations revealed by insiders, Trump vents his fury not with sweeping rhetoric but with deeply personal anger. He mocks Monarez, questioning her competence, belittling her resolve. At times, he is reported to slam his hand against the table, demanding why this fight remains unresolved. Then, in quieter moments, he asks whether pushing harder could trigger a backlash too dangerous to risk. These flashes of doubt expose the contradiction at the heart of his persona. An unyielding leader who must always project strength, yet a man aware, somewhere in his private calculations, that even endless conflict carries costs. Monarez, by merely refusing to resign, has placed Trump in a position where his strongest weapon, conflict itself, may become a liability. Every headline, every opinion poll, refracts the story in multiple directions. For some Americans, she has become a reluctant hero, not because they know her deeply, but because she stands where others have crumbled. For Trump's voters, she has become proof of rebellion against his will, the embodiment of forces they distrust. Each side strengthens the other, making compromise impossible. Trump cannot stop, and Monarez cannot yield. This cycle mirrors the contradictions that have always defined Trump's leadership. He thrives on division, yet division limits his ability to build consensus. He commands loyalty through intimidation, yet the more he demands it, the more he reveals cracks in his coalition. Publicly, he projects invulnerability, but privately, his behavior betrays the stress of maintaining that image. The Supreme Court case is, in many ways, the perfect manifestation of this contradiction. Trump has succeeded in making the conflict momentous, ensuring it occupies the nation's attention. Yet, by doing so, he has elevated Monarez as well. In elevating the fight, he has amplified his opponent. And in a battle where he demands absolute control, the visibility of her defiance threatens to erode the very control he seeks to demonstrate. As legal teams prepare arguments and television panels dissect every development, the contradiction deepens. Trump cannot eliminate Monarez without proving her right, that she is the victim of political reprisal. He cannot allow her to remain without proving himself wrong, that his grip on power is weaker than advertised. The spectacle becomes not just a dispute about authority, but a mirror reflecting the paradox of Trump's political identity. He is strongest when fighting, yet by fighting, he increases the power of the very enemies he seeks to erase. And so, the nation watches a man at war not only with an individual, not only with institutions, but ultimately with the contradictions of his own making. A man who cannot yield, because yielding is weakness, who cannot win outright, because every escalation strengthens his opponent. The stage is set not only for a constitutional battle, but for a collision between persona and reality, between the image of unshakable dominance and the limits of authority itself. Whether the outcome strengthens Trump or weakens him, one truth remains. The contradiction at the heart of his leadership has never been more exposed or more dangerous. For years, Susan Monarez was anything but a household name. To the public, she was invisible, a scientist and administrator who worked quietly in the shadows of public health agencies, devoted to research, structure, and the often thankless task of holding bureaucracy together. Colleagues describe her as reserved, deliberate, and methodical, a woman who rarely raised her voice, but when she spoke, people listened. She never sought the political stage. It came crashing down on her. What makes her refusal to step aside so powerful is precisely that she does not fit the mold of a political rebel. She is not a firebrand, nor a radical. She is not a partisan fighter trying to carve a legacy. Instead, she is a career professional who finds herself, almost reluctantly, standing at the center of a national storm. Her resistance has less to do with ambition and everything to do with conviction, that if she yields, she will betray not only herself but the very institution she was entrusted to protect. In private moments, friends recall seeing the weight settle on her shoulders. A woman who once lived quietly in suburban Washington, running errands unnoticed, now finds herself with security details shadowing her every step. Neighbors whisper, reporters gather outside her building, strangers shout both praise and condemnation as she walks into work. What began as an administrative standoff has consumed her life. At grocery stores, at gas stations, there are always eyes, some sympathetic, others hostile, all of them reminding her that she has become something larger than herself. Inside the CDC, the mood is tense. Employees who once knew Monarez only as a colleague now speak of her in reverent tones. To some, she is proof that integrity still has defenders. To others, she is a reminder of the dangerous cost of resisting political power. Whispers travel down hallways. Who still supports her? Who has distanced themselves? Each interaction feels observed, recorded, judged. For an agency built on science, the atmosphere increasingly feels like a theater of politics, with Monarez cast, unwillingly, as its lead. Her personal history only deepens the drama. Born into a modest family, she chose medicine and science rather than politics, drawn to the discipline of data, numbers, and facts. She rarely courted the spotlight, preferring achievements measured in research publications rather than headlines. Yet those close to her say she has always carried a stubborn streak, a refusal to yield when she believes the stakes are higher than herself. That streak, once a quiet trait, has now become a national act of defiance. Her opponents paint her differently. In media outlets sympathetic to Trump, she is portrayed as insubordinate, a bureaucrat clinging to power she was never meant to hold. They call her unaccountable, unelected, a symbol of government bloat. They argue that the president has every right to replace her, that her resistance is nothing less than sabotage. Each interview, each sound bite, attempts to frame her as an obstacle to Trump's vision of authority. Yet her silence, her refusal to match Trump's bombast with her own outrage, has given her an aura of dignity. While Trump speaks in fiery rhetoric, Monarez's voice remains calm, measured, almost restrained. When she does appear in public, she speaks of duty, not politics, of responsibility, not ambition. This contrast, her composure against his fury, has transformed her, unintentionally, into a symbol not only for those who oppose Trump but for many undecided Americans who yearn for steadiness amid the storm. But standing her ground has exacted a personal price. Friends describe long stretches of loneliness. Some nights, she sits by her window, staring out at the city lights, her phone buzzing with calls she no longer answers. Family members have been drawn into the storm, receiving threats, their privacy shattered. She confides in a small circle that she misses the quiet life she once had, the simplicity of focusing on research. Yet when asked if she regrets her stance, she reportedly shakes her head. "This isn't about me," she tells them. "It's about what comes after me." Her defiance has also begun to inspire echoes beyond Washington. Across the nation, health professionals, scientists, and even university students have begun to speak her name as a rallying cry. Online, hashtags circulate, "Stand with Monarez." At small protests, people carry her image on signs, not because they know her personally, but because she embodies their frustrations, that science has too often been bent to serve politics, that truth has been drowned in noise. She has, without seeking it, become a symbol of resistance far beyond the walls of the CDC. Yet Monarez's path remains precarious. The Supreme Court looms, and with it a decision that could either cement her stand as historic or erase it entirely. She knows the risks. One ruling, one vote, could strip her of her role, leaving her defiance remembered only as a brief stand against an unstoppable tide. And yet she steps forward, day after day, into her office, into meetings, into the storm, refusing to bend. Every era finds its unlikely figures of resistance, ordinary individuals caught in extraordinary circumstances, whose courage lies not in seeking conflict but in refusing to surrender when conflict finds them. Today, Susan Monarez is one of those figures. Whether she triumphs or falls, whether her name becomes a chapter in history or a footnote, her defiance has already carved a mark, showing the nation, and perhaps the world, that sometimes the strongest voice is the one that refuses to be silenced. The Supreme Court is the final stage of American conflict. Its marble columns, towering and immovable, give an air of permanence and certainty in a political world defined by noise and instability. Yet in the case of Susan Monarez versus Donald Trump, those very halls, hushed, solemn, and guarded, have become the arena for one of the most polarizing clashes in recent memory. On the morning of the first hearing, the streets of Washington pulse with tension. Crowds stretch for blocks, protesters on one side raising Susan Monarez's name as a banner of integrity, and Trump supporters on the other, demanding loyalty to executive authority. Chants collide in the thick summer air, the rhythmic beat of drums mixing with shouts of anger and cries of support. Reporters swarm, cameras mounted on every corner, narrating every word, every gesture, every moment of suspense. Inside the High Court, the atmosphere is no less electric. The justices, robed in black, maintain their characteristic stillness, yet there is a weight in the room that presses down on everyone present. This is not just another legal dispute, it is a confrontation between the authority of the presidency and the independence of a public health institution. Each attorney who steps to the podium speaks not only to the 9 justices but to an entire nation watching from living rooms, offices, and phones. Trump's legal team frames the issue as simple. The president has the constitutional right to remove officials who contradict his administration. To them, Monarez's refusal is insubordination, a dangerous precedent of unelected resistance. They warn that if the court allows her defiance, the executive branch itself will be weakened, leaving every president hamstrung by bureaucrats unwilling to obey. Monarez's defenders tell a different story. They argue that the CDC, like other public health institutions, must be led by professionals guided by science, not political whims. If Trump succeeds, they say, it will set a chilling precedent. That expertise can be discarded at will, that truth itself can be fired. To them, Monarez is not clinging to power. She is protecting an institution from collapse under the weight of politics. The justices listen attentively, their poker faces unchanged. Yet subtle exchanges betray the tension. A raised eyebrow, a sudden question from the bench, a pause longer than expected. Every gesture ignites waves of speculation outside the courtroom. Commentators dissect each word, guessing which line of reasoning might sway the final vote. Beyond the legal arguments lies something more profound, a struggle over the soul of governance. The case is not only about whether Monarez stays or goes. It is about the fragile boundary between science and politics, between authority and independence, between truth and narrative. The weight of these questions fills the courtroom, pressing against the walls until even silence carries the echo of national consequence. For Susan Monarez herself, the courtroom is both intimidating and clarifying. She sits quietly with her attorneys, her face calm but her eyes resolute. She does not take the floor. Her presence is enough. Each camera that captures her expression transmits not only her defiance but the human cost of the ordeal. A woman who never sought the spotlight, now carrying on her shoulders the hopes of those who believe truth can still hold its ground. Trump, meanwhile, follows the proceedings closely but from a distance. His public statements remain defiant, framing the court battle as yet another attempt by forces determined to weaken him. Yet insiders whisper that he is restless, pacing in private, demanding updates every hour. To him, the court is not just an institution of justice, it is the stage where his strength, his image, his dominance will either be confirmed or questioned. As arguments close, no verdict is given. That will come later, in an opinion carefully written, parsed, and remembered. But the drama of the day leaves its mark. Protesters clash outside as police hold the lines. Commentators declare it the most consequential case for the CDC in its history. And across the nation, Americans feel the gravity. This is more than a battle of law, it is a moment that may decide how power is defined for years to come. The Supreme Court, normally slow and deliberate, now stands at the eye of a storm. Its decision will ripple far beyond Washington, shaping not only the fate of Susan Monarez but the delicate balance between truth, science, and power in America's future.